Welcome to the Jenny Beth Show.
Yesterday, tens of thousands of Americans gathered on the National Mall for Rededicate 250, a national day of prayer, praise, and thanksgiving. President Trump, Vice President Vance, Speaker Johnson, Secretary Hegseth, and Secretary Rubio all participated. Exactly 250 years ago today, or yesterday, rather, on May 17, 1776, the same day and month as yesterday's Rededicate 250 service, the Continental Congress declared a national day of humility, fasting, and prayer. They were weeks away from declaring independence. They had everything to lose, and they stopped, turned towards God, and prayed. Listen to what the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, said yesterday.
And on this very day, now 2.5 centuries ago, the Second Continental Congress gathered in Philadelphia, facing imminent battle and almost certain death. Our founders held a decisive day of what they called humiliation, fasting, and prayer. They did that to humble themselves and to seek your guidance at the dawn of their fight for freedom.
And this morning on X, Speaker Johnson said, America stands alone as a nation founded upon a creed articulated in our Declaration 250 years ago that has been the greatest force for peace, justice, and innovation the world has ever known. For 2.5 centuries, America has been a land of hope and liberty, a place of miracles, and a light to all nations because we are a nation of faith. May God continue to bless this great nation, and may we remain a people of prayer. Here is President Trump's message to Rededicate 250. Take a look.
Thus Solomon finished the house of the Lord and the king's house, and all that came into Solomon's heart to make in the house of the Lord, and in his own house he prosperously effected. And the Lord appeared to Solomon by night and said to him, I have heard your prayer and have chosen this place to myself for a house of sacrifice. If I shut up heaven, that there be no rain, or if I command the locusts to devour the land, or if I send pestilence among my people, if my people, which are called by my name, shall humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then will I hear from heaven and will forgive their sin and will heal their land. Now my eyes shall be open and my ears attent to the prayer that is made in this place.
2 Chronicles 7:14. If my people, which are called by my name, shall humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven and forgive their sin and will heal their land. We carry that spirit into the show today and into the election season. Now, to today's top news. The United States Senate must pass the Save America Act. President Trump posted on Truth Social this weekend, in all caps, in no uncertain terms, demanding that Congress attach it to every must-pass bill. Take a look at what President Trump posted on Saturday morning. He said, the Save America Act must be passed now. Use housing and FISA bills to get it done. Maryland just had 500,000 fake mail-in ballots revealed. We cannot, as a country, put up with this any longer. Voter ID and proof of citizenship must be approved now. Crooked mail-in voting must be stopped. Put it in the housing and FISA bills. Make America great again. President Donald J. Trump. We'll discuss this in relation to its implications for our call to action shortly. And on Saturday, Louisiana had its Republican Senate primary. Senator Bill Cassidy, who voted to impeach President Trump after January 6, finished a distant third. He goes the way of Liz Cheney, despite outspending his opponents by a ratio of roughly 3-1. The voters of Louisiana delivered a message that every Republican senator in Washington needs to hear. Republican senators are also moving right now to fund ICE and Border Patrol through the reconciliation process after Democrats shut down the Department of Homeland Security for 76 days. We're going to break that down for you today as well. I have 3 outstanding guests with me today. Scott McKay, publisher of The Hayride, Louisiana's premier political, or rather conservative political commentary site. Connie Hare, Louisiana State Director for the State Freedom Caucus Network and a Capitol Hill veteran who has spent decades at the center of the conservative legislative fight. And Robert McNeily, our new Director of Broadcasting and Grassroots Engagement here at Tea Party Patriots Action, someone who has covered this movement from the front lines for years. Let me bring in our panel. Scott, Connie, Robert, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having us.
Always a pleasure, Jenny Beth.
Let's start with Louisiana. Saturday was primary day, and Louisiana Republican voters sent a message that I think the entire United States Senate needs to hear. Scott, take us through the full picture. What exactly happened on Saturday, and what does it mean for Louisiana's congressional delegation going into November?
Okay, so essentially what you had was a three-way race between Julia Letlow, who is a sitting congressman from the 5th District of Louisiana, John Fleming, who is the state treasurer of Louisiana and a former member of Congress. In fact, he was one of the original founders of the House Freedom Caucus, and Bill Cassidy. Cassidy was in a lot of trouble. He's been in a lot of trouble for 5 years. He was one of the 7, I guess it is, Republican senators who voted to convict President Trump on a post-presidential impeachment. And it was one of these weird situations where 2 days before that vote, he also voted that the impeachment was unconstitutional. So that he voted to do something that he said was unconstitutional. And he never rectified that political mistake. Despite having 5 years and thousands of chances to do so. And then, he ran a campaign. It was one of the most bizarre things anybody has ever seen in Louisiana. He runs a campaign basically talking about, I've supported President Trump nonstop over the last 5 years. And when Trump needs a helping hand in the Senate, he comes to me. And everybody's like, what are you talking about? You tried to impeach him. And so the polls turned against him really from the get-go. As soon as the field filled up, it was obvious that Cassidy could not get to 50% in a party primary in Louisiana. But he kept running. I mean, and when Letlow entered the race back in January with President Trump's endorsement, it became patently obvious Cassidy couldn't win. And then it was just a question of whether he would even make the runoff. And about 3 weeks ago, the polls started showing that he was going to come in third. And he never changed course. And so he just got annihilated. And Letlow got 45% of the vote Saturday night. John Fleming got 28 and Cassidy got 25. And so his political career is done. And not many people around here will miss him.
I don't think many people around the country will miss him either.
Jake Tapper will miss him.
Well, and
but then again, Jake Tapper can have him on the show anytime he wants now because he's not busy.
Right. That is true. Who knows? He might go get some sort of contract with one of the mainstream media outlets. It seems like a lot of former members of Congress do that. In addition to everything you just said about him, which is egregious enough, he also was not good when it came to COVID lockdowns and vaccine mandates, was he?
No, Cassidy was, I think, known as the probably most slavish devotee to Big Pharma in the entire U.S. Senate. He's a doctor. He's a gastroenterologist. And Cassidy is a guy who over and over and over again says that, your kids need all 70 of the vaccines they give your kids after they're born, and none of them can be reexamined. He was, as chair of the Senate Healthcare Committee, I mean, he was the bane of Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s existence. It's going to be really interesting because when Cassidy goes, Roger Marshall is probably going to take over that committee, and Marshall is actually a big fan of RFK Jr. So that committee is liable to have a real serious sea change in how it approaches these issues. Cassidy was bad on that. He was horrendous on COVID, and at a time when we needed people in the Senate to actually stand up for the American people, Cassidy stood up for the big healthcare and big pharma.
Yeah.
And that had a lot to do with what happened to him as well, because the Maha movement in Louisiana is pretty strong, and they had it in for Bill Cassidy.
Yeah, and it's the Maha movement and then the mom movement as well, because moms did not like seeing their kids locked down.
Right.
And the kind of thing that we heard from him and from others about lockdowns caused children not to be in school even longer. Not everywhere, but in some places. And I just think that where moms have been able to have a voice in that, they're just saying no. They don't want that ever to happen again.
It's a big deal. Although, to be honest, it was the impeachment vote, and it was the fact that he never backed off from it. And with the most amazing thing about this is the member of Congress who's done more on the issue of January 6th and what actually happened on January 6th than anybody else is Clay Higgins, who's from Louisiana. You know, Higgins was the guy who basically exposed the fact that you had hundreds of federal assets roaming the Capitol grounds on January 6th. And it gave Cassidy a perfect opportunity to go, you know, had I known back in January of 21 what I know now about what actually happened on January 6th, I might not have made that vote. Had he done that, he probably could have cured that impeachment vote. He never backed off it 1 second. And that just infuriated people. Like it was a toxic situation with the voters of the state, because we kept finding out more and more about January. It's like, wait a minute, this was like a Fedsurrection. Something happened here that wasn't right. That, you know, the election in 2020, even Todd Blanche, the attorney general right now, was like, yeah, we got lots of evidence that this election was rigged. Cassidy never even touched any of that. He had so many opportunities to get back on the wagon and say, hey guys, you know, I think I might have gotten duped. Didn't even have to apologize, but he never came off it. Basically goes to his political grave, pushing the establishment line that nobody believes anymore. And so, you know, you're a dinosaur, and the meteor just hit. So, bye, Bill.
So, Connie, let me ask you a question. And I couldn't be more pleased that Bill Cassidy is gone. He'll probably be a thorn in our side until January, but at least then he will no longer be a thorn in our side. Connie, you were the Louisiana State Director of the State Freedom Caucus Network and a Louisiana native. Cassidy outspent Letlow roughly 3-1, and combined with the pro-Cassidy super PAC, it was roughly $22 million against about $3.9 million. He still finished third. What do you think that tells us about where the Louisiana Republican voters are right now?
Well, the Republican voters in Louisiana are the most conservative that you can find anywhere. We are a supermajority conservative state. Everybody runs as a conservative. They don't necessarily govern like that, but they run that way. And money is not really the largest issue here. I think it's betrayal. People here are honest, hardworking, down to earth people, for the most part, that really, really, really give their word and mean it. And they just really, I've never seen a visceral dislike for anyone like they have for Bill Cassidy. It's you say his name and people knee jerk, it's not good. So I had no doubt for a long time that he would not win the race. I did not know until recently that he would come in third, it's a happy day,
It is. It really is. Robert, you covered this from a national perspective at Right Side Broadcasting before you came to Tea Party Patriots Action. Cassidy voted, of course, as we were just saying, to impeach President Trump. Senator Lindsey Graham said after Saturday that there is, quote, no room left in the Republican Party to oppose Trump's agenda. Is this result a warning every Republican senator is currently blocking Trump's priorities should be paying attention to?
Lindsey Graham is right on, and tomorrow 7 primaries, including the Commonwealth of Kentucky. So next on the docket, perhaps Congressman Thomas Massie. And Scott is 100% correct when you look at the voters will forgive. I call it the Kennedy effect, going back to the Cuban Missile Crisis. He took responsibility, unlike so many politicians like Big Bill Cassidy down in Louisiana, who kept this Trump derangement syndrome going. And then we have, of course, May 26 coming up in the Lone Star State between Ken Paxton and John Cornyn. So not only an anti-incumbent insurgents, but it's those who were elected during the MAGA years, and especially on November 5th of 2024, to operate with that mandate from the American people. But some of these Republicans acting more like Democrats. And again, as the vice president has said, we like Thomas Massie, we like his principles. The problem is he's voting more with Democrats. So we might see that next on the docket tomorrow in the primaries.
Scott, Louisiana voters also rejected all 5 constitutional amendments on Saturday. What were those amendments, and what does it tell us that they rejected them all?
Well, okay, so if you've gone to the ballot and you've seen a constitutional amendment, what you generally know is you can't discern what's actually on the ballot from what's on the ballot. Like, you have to read news reports and things like that in order to accurately understand what's going on. Voters in Louisiana, and I think in a lot of places, have a reflexive, the default position is to vote no on a constitutional amendment. And when you present them with 5 of them at the same time, that instinct is going to kick in even more. The amendments were actually, 4 of the 5 were really good. One of them was to reform the civil service in the state. One of them was to pay off a bunch of retirement debt so that local school systems would have money freed up to give teachers a pay raise. They wanted to create an independent school district in a suburban city that just got founded just outside of Baton Rouge, and that's a big loss that this thing went down in flames. There was some good stuff on there, but they did this in a May election, which Louisiana generally doesn't have a lot of. I mean, our elections have always been October, November, because we've typically used a jungle primary system. So they moved the elections earlier to do party primaries, and then they put constitutional amendments on the ballot when, people aren't used to this. And so you had decent turnout for a May election, but the problem is the left spent a whole bunch of money to defeat these amendments, because to do so would make Jeff Landry, the governor, look bad. And they were able to accomplish it. This is the second year in a row, by the way, that they've run constitutional amendments on the ballot in the spring, and the left has spent 7 figures to beat them. So the lesson is, please don't do this anymore. Do your constitutional amendments in November when everybody knows they're voting and people are actually paying attention full bore to all of the stuff that's on the ballot. And also, don't run 5 of them out there. Run 2. Pick the 2 best ones and run those, and then you can actually have a policy discussion. This go around, everybody looks like, how many of these things are on the ballot? I don't want to vote for 5 things. Forget that. I'm not voting for anything. And you had a lot of that, even though, like today, when people are actually seeing what they voted against, they're like, oh, I could have maybe voted for that. But it's bad tactics. And it's a mistake that the Louisiana legislature really needs to fix, because, look, the left can't win elections in Louisiana, but that doesn't stop them from trying to pick off things as they go. I mean, like you guys have seen this all over the country. In a special election, they will come in and outspend Republicans 10-1 so that they can claim a victory in, some red state somewhere. And then come November, it usually gets rectified when everybody's actually going to the polls. And so when you dangle constitutional amendments out there on essentially what people recognize as a special election type of cycle, you're inviting that money to come in and give them a win. And our political class in Louisiana is, we're still kind of new to Republicans running everything, and they don't have all the bases covered.
Yeah, well, hopefully in the future they will put the amendments in with the general election. And also, it's just weird to do it in the primary because you get so many more people voting in the general election anyway. Connie, what do you make of it, and what are your legislators saying about that part?
Well, what actually, putting it in the earlier vote, and with all of the maps problems we've been having with LA v. Calais, you didn't even have the congressional election this time around. They have now moved the congressional election to November. The primary will be election day in a jungle, and then you'll have the runoff in December. So again, we're back to the jungle primary that we worked so hard to get rid of. But they're pretty disappointed that a lot of these things were shot down. And I think there's a lot of discontent right now with the supermajority legislature that we have. We have every state office holder is a Republican, but they're still doing things like yesterday, or excuse me, a couple days ago, they passed a government-run grocery bill through the House. And it's virtue signaling.
They did what?
Yes, you heard that right. They passed government-funded grocery stores. We have food deserts in Louisiana. Excuse me?
That's what Mondami would do.
We eat here. We eat. You don't have food deserts in Louisiana.
No.
So yeah, they passed that through the House and virtue signaled their way through the whole thing with a supermajority Republican. So hopefully the Senate will come to its senses and kill it. But we still have really stupid politics here sometimes. The people of Louisiana have roundly rejected the Democrat ideology, and we shouldn't even, Scott always says in his publication, we shouldn't even bring a Democrat bill to the floor unless they have Republican co-sponsors. And I got to tell you, this time around, we have a 3-month-long legislative session, 3 months. Guess how many bills we had, instruments between resolutions and bills? 2,390 and counting to this day. And we have not even hit the sine die mark until June 1st. We have got to do something to limit the volume of instruments coming across the floor, out of committee, across the floor, amended here, amended there. These people can't read these things. They can't read them all. They don't understand them. My people get the information because I'm the one sitting reading them and writing the bill breakdowns and keeping, reconciling the amendments to the bill. But this is no way to run a state or a legislature.
No, that's just craziness.
It's too much.
It should. I can't believe they did a grocery store bill. I know I'm stuck on this, but I expect that from Mondami, not from Louisiana.
That was everyone's reaction. Everyone's reaction. What?
Jenny Beth, these things pass because the bills are running through the floor session 90-0, and they didn't even know what they're voting on. And so, people get confused or it's like, yeah, okay, whatever, which is why my rule of, look, find out who the bill is or who's bringing the bill. If it's a Democrat and they don't have a Republican signing on, kill it in committee so that you free up the floor and you don't make these kinds of mistakes and embarrass everybody in the House. Because the bill can't pass without Republican support anyway. So kill it on the front end and let's have a reasoned debate on the things that actually do have a chance to pass rather than moving stuff across the marble to the Senate and giving them more things to do. It increases the likelihood of something terrible passing both houses. But also, they're going to do the same thing to you. They're going to send garbage bills across. And so a little bit of discipline means fewer bills getting debated. And you get a better debate because you can actually spend some time and do it right. You get a whole legislature full of politicians. Everybody wants to bring bills and pass them so that they can say, look what I did. When, and this isn't just a Louisiana thing, it's an everybody thing. It's a lot better record as a legislature to kill bad bills than it is to bring good ones.
Or even limit the number of bills that they can bring each person.
And in fiscal sessions in Louisiana, that's what we do. And those sessions tend to be a little bit more, regulated and professionally done. The even year sessions like this one are a mess. And it's not just Louisiana. You talk to people in legislatures across the country, and they'll tell you, the proliferation of bad bills that they have to wade through is like the bane of their existence. And, it's not hard to fix that. You just put a limit on how many bills people can bring.
Well, and the party that is supposed to stand for a constitutionally limited government should not be cheering that they have 2,390 bills. They should be trying to get it down to as few bills as possible, because the more bills that are passed, the more laws that are created, the bigger the government becomes.
No question.
Bless their
That's
hearts.
why we have the state freedom caucuses popping up around the country. We are standing them up in legislature after legislature after legislature to try to bring some sanity to the madness out there from these supermajority or majority Republican legislatures. They are as rhino and as swampy as could be across the country. And it's not just Louisiana where we have the real swamps.
Connie, speaking of your work around the rest of the country, Governor McMaster from South Carolina called a special session after 5 Republican senators blocked the redistricting effort during a regular session. President Trump has personally called South Carolina lawmakers and posted on Truth Social demanding they act. What are you hearing about what might happen in South Carolina? Have you heard anything about that?
Well, I've heard that there are really high hopes for getting a new map through, because LA v. Calais took race out of the mix, period. The Section 2 of the Voter Rights Act was never supposed to be about race. It was actually the opposite, to allow the representation of political ideology around the state. So when they took race out of the mix and stopped using that, for the structure of all of the maps, where they would have to gerrymander and go to all of these, you've seen the crazy lightning bolt in Louisiana, and it's around the country. The Democrats are already doing this. The Democrats have gerrymandered the heck out of their states. They cannot squeeze, any more seats out in some places. So they have, they have been doing it for a long time. So it's not surprising now that the South, now that it's out from under preclearance and all of the things that the Voter Rights Act brought to the South because of Democrats after the Civil War, they're the ones who were fighting for slavery, not the Republicans. So when they took that yoke of Democrat racism off of the necks of the southern states a few years back with Section 5, Section 2 now is no more race, and so people want to fix their maps to be more representative of what we're doing. So South Carolina has every reason to do it, because they have had to gerrymander seats to get majority minority districts when it was a stretch, literally.
So, Robert, when we look at the big picture, Louisiana, South Carolina, Texas, Tennessee, the Republican legislatures are redrawing or looking at redrawing maps in all of these states. Democrats are screaming. What do you think the national significance of this redistricting wave is for the 2026 House majority?
Well, from a strategic perspective with Republicans, we're looking at a net gain potentially of 20 plus seats. So we'll see if Speaker Mike Johnson and company leadership can all not only fundraise, make those phone calls, get that door knocking organized, just as the 2024 MAGA campaign did to make those successful campaigns take place. But ultimately, Jenny Beth, you're looking at a defense of the 14th Amendment. And in turn, you still have red districts, you still have blue districts, but you make this map more competitive. And in turn, sitting congressmen and incumbents actually perhaps need to get to know their constituents better, so it reinforces not only federalism, but what our Republican government, not the party, but our constitutional republic now celebrating 250 years really is all about. So I'm excited to see originalism upheld by the Supreme Court and states' rights really coming into play here as we look at the midterms in 2026.
Very good. Okay, we're going to be right back, so don't go anywhere. Before we go back to our guests, Scott McKay, Connie Hare, and Robert McNeily, let's go over this week's call to action, which we have modified slightly because President Trump posted about attaching the Save America Act to must-pass legislation. So it's time for our call to action, which is threefold this week. First is to call your U.S. Congressman at 202-224-3121. Again, that's 202-224-3121. 3121. That's the Capitol switchboard. Tell your member of Congress to join President Trump's call to action to attach the Save America Act to every single bill the House moves until this is passed into law. The House has already passed it. The votes are there, and the House needs to put the pressure back on the Senate, which attaching it to must-pass legislation will do. Tell them to find a way, and you can go to passthesaveamericaact.com for more details. Next, in that same phone call, tell your congressman to stop the so-called Dignity Act. That is amnesty. We do not want amnesty. No amnesty, not now, not ever. You can go to teapartypatriots.org for more details on this. And then finally, thank President Trump. Reach out to the White House to thank President Trump for his truth post this weekend and for his commitment to get the Save America Act passed into law. So you support his effort and urge him to veto legislation that does not include the Save America Act. You can do this by posting on social media and tagging the president, as well as completing the White House Contact Us form, which is at whitehouse.gov/contact. Okay, back to our panelists, Connie, Robert, and Scott. Connie, you wrote about the Save America Act back in February when it passed the House, and now President Trump is posting in all caps demanding that the bill be attached to housing, the housing bill, and the FISA reauthorization. You spent many years on Capitol Hill. What is specifically blocking this bill in the Senate? Why haven't the senators taken the right action? And what can we do to help?
Well, the Senate is an odd, group of people. They don't want to give President Trump a win. I think that's just the bottom line. This big win. The people like Thune, the establishment Republicans, they are the problem in this. The Democrats, we know what they're going to do. They're the minority, and we keep forgetting this. I think honestly, the problem is that Thune doesn't think he has 51 votes to pass it. So he's not going to fight for it because he doesn't want to expose how many people despise Donald Trump in that Senate. And that is my opinion, but I honestly believe that is what is holding it up. The Senate parliamentarian does what she does. They're going to do what they're going to do with all of this legislation. But the bottom line is you have people who will not give Donald Trump a win. End of story.
And if they go out flat out and oppose President Trump, then they may be facing the fate of Senator Cassidy.
Yes, you and I had a discussion once, Jenny Beth, and we talked about back when John Boehner was Speaker. These people, these establishment Republicans, are America's defeat mechanism. They know that they would rather govern as not conservatives, but say they are, or be in the minority than pass conservative policy. They don't want it. They are Democrat light. And we had this discussion, I remember, about John Boehner back in the day. They would rather be in the minority than pass conservative policy.
It's maddening, but we can't give up. And
No.
President Trump does not want us to give up. So we have to just continue to be focused on it. Scott, Maryland just sent wrong party ballots to more than 500,000 voters, 500,000 voters. President Trump called them fake mail-in ballots. The state election board in Maryland says it was a vendor error, not intentional fraud, which that's probably true. It probably was a vendor error. But the fact that they have that many mail-in ballots going out creates part of the problem, which is why President Trump is so concerned about mail-in ballots. And in Louisiana, you guys have really I think, cleaned up the way that you vote in Louisiana. Your early voting is a pretty short period. Yeah. I'm not sure about your mail-in balloting. You are getting rid of the jungle primary. What do you think of the Save America Act and also the ballot issue from Maryland?
Well, the Save America Act is like the biggest no-brainer in a modern American political history, right? Like the idea that you restrict voting to citizens when voting is like the primary mechanism of citizenship. Like, it's kind of hard to understand why you would let foreigners run your elections. Of course, if you pay attention to Act Blue, you'll understand that that is how one of the two parties funds their campaigns, is foreign money. So it's not a big surprise that they want foreign voters as well. But like, average Americans have no interest in any of this. I mean, like, the worst poll I've ever seen on the Save America Act was a Rasmussen poll from a couple of days ago, and it still has 63% of the voters saying that this thing needs to go. 42% of Democrats want it. So like, there should be zero trouble to pass this. It's an uncontroversial bill that essentially puts voter ID and proof of citizenship at the forefront of election integrity in this country. No problem. Like, that's something that 20 years ago, Democrats all crowed about how they wanted it, and now they don't, which is a glaring indictment of their party. But the fact that the Mitch McConnells and Tom Tillis's and Lisa Murkowski's, and now that he's lost his primary, I'm a little worried that Bill Cassidy is going to join him. I think Connie's right. They don't want to give Trump a win, but also they like the political status quo exactly how it is, because the same corporate lobbyists and special interest groups that control Washington, D.C. will continue to control Washington, D.C. if you can keep the public sentiment down, right? You send a Bill Cassidy back to the Senate because he spends $50 million when his competitors can only spend 10 or 15, and that's how you maintain the status quo in Washington. Problem is, it's breaking down, right? John Cornyn is what, the number 2 or number 3 guy in that Senate caucus? Early voting in Texas starts tomorrow, okay? And Ken Paxton has been ahead of Cornyn in every poll. I think they've spent something like $60 million against Paxton, and he's still ahead, okay? Texas is a big state. It's not that big a state. This is a ridiculous amount of money, and yet the public just isn't interested anymore. Part of it is that the mainstream media does not have the hold on people that it used to. So when you go drop a massive amount of money on TV, not that many people see it anymore. And then part of it is that everybody recognizes that the narratives that get spun out there by the pros are lies, and they're not interested anymore. They've heard all this stuff, and they're like, yeah, I don't want to hear it. Bill Cassidy said all of the things that were supposed to work in Louisiana, right? And nobody believed a word of it. And like, his camp was sitting there like, what's wrong with these kids? How come they won't dance to the music, right? And it just, it's because the song stinks and everybody's done. And I think that that's part of the problem. I mean, the Democrats have this same problem, which is why they're losing their party to the communists. But Republicans, like the old school, Cassidy, Thune, McConnell, Cornyn type, these kind of blow-dried politicians that Ross Perot used to talk about, like, those guys cannot reach the public anymore because we don't live in the America that these guys came from. And so that style of politics is just done. And I think, Cassidy he's not the first. He's the first in a while, but like, there's going to be a whole string of Republican kind of old school politicians who are going to go down to defeat. Cornyn, I think, is coming. But in 2028, when you start looking at some of the fossils who are up for re-election, like, none of those guys are going to be back. They're all going to get beat in primaries. Most of them will probably give up before they even run. And at that point, we might actually have an opportunity to build a Senate that's somewhat responsive to the American people. But you have a remnant that runs that thing now. This is still Mitch McConnell's Senate. John Thune is Mitch McConnell, he's his mini-me. But I don't even want to blast Thune. Thune is reflective of the caucus. Thune is what you get when that's who your caucus is. And so, he's not going to fight too hard for the SAVE Act, but he'll certainly make speeches on how it should pass And he brags about, I've given more speeches on passing the SAVE Act than anybody else. And it's like, yeah, we get it, John. Empty words. Will you go break arms to get this thing passed? Will you tell people we're not going to spend any NRSC money on you unless you vote for this bill? Like, so far, I haven't seen any evidence that Thune's willing to do that. And until he does the things that Harry Reid used to do to get his caucus to vote for things that they didn't want to vote for because they knew it was hell for him back home. Like, until Thune is willing to do that kind of stuff and show that kind of leadership, you're not going to pass even this bill that everybody wants. You can't pass it. And we're gonna operate at Chuck Schumer's suffrage in the U.S. Senate when even his own party can't stand Chuck Schumer anymore.
Yeah, Scott, you said a couple of things there that I think are really important to note. First, you mentioned what Harry Reid would do, and he would put the pressure on, even if it's things that people did not want back home. The difference with this legislation is it's things people want back home.
Exactly.
Go pass it. They want it, so go pass it.
If Susan Collins could be the 51st vote to pass the SAVE Act, it would destroy this guy with the Nazi tattoo that's running against her. The voters in Maine who are beset with Somali pirates, okay, who show up at the ballot station just as like, wait a minute, what's that guy doing here? He can't even speak English. Like, the voters in Maine, when somebody actually gives them a reason to vote Republican, actually will vote Republican. Paul LePage was governor for 2 terms over there, and that guy was unapologetically conservative. And yet Susan Collins is like, well, I have to walk on eggshells. It's like, this one time, if you would come out and say, give me the damn thing, I'm going to vote for the SAVE Act, her race would be over. And all of that money they're pouring into Graham Plattner would just evaporate because there'd be no point to it. She's making that race close by not holding faith with her own voters. And she's not the only one. But like this idea that, well, you can't ask Susan Collins to vote for this. It's a plus. Go pull the thing in Maine. I guarantee it's getting 70% support over there.
I'm sure it's getting 70% support, and she's fundraised off of it. So she should be voting for it. She's raising money off of it. Don't raise money for something if you're going to vote against it. And during the budget process for this version of reconciliation that is happening right now, they had a vote-a-rama. Senator Kennedy offered pretty much the SAVE Act as an amendment, and it failed 48 to 50. Susan Collins did not vote in favor of it. She should have voted in favor of it. If you're raising money off of it, you need to be voting for it. Not only that, we're not asking you to do we're not saying get rid of all the voting machines. We're not saying put Trump-appointed poll watchers in every single location or ICE or whatever else, things that most people might have objections to. We're talking about something that's not even close. We want to make sure only American citizens vote for the American president, Senate, and Congress. Period. Full stop. 87% of Americans agree with that statement. It is not hard. It should be a no-brainer for Senator Collins. I appreciate the fact she is in a tough state, and Maine tends to be much more liberal than the states where I live. I get that. But this is not a liberal issue. It is a common sense issue. And when the Democrats are so opposed to it, and they are spending millions and millions of dollars opposing it, all you can do is think they must want to protect the status quo because they are benefiting from it. They are okay making it easy to vote and easy to cheat. They don't want to make it hard to cheat. And that is despicable. And Senator Collins, I think she needs to do better than what she's doing right now. And Scott Pressler and I are going to Maine the last weekend of this month to talk to the voters there about exactly what she's doing. Okay, I will hop down off of my soapbox there. Robert, the left says requiring proof of citizenship to vote will disenfranchise millions of Americans who don't have passports or birth certificates. 83% of Americans support it, including 73% of Democrats. How do you answer this argument?
Jenny Beth, I had to go look at a property over the weekend. I had to use both sides of my identification. I had to upload that new app. And I'm not the most tech savvy, but I guarantee that most Americans can do just that for everyday items in their lives. What it boils down to, it's common sense on the right side of history and chaos and calamity on the far left. But to Scott's point, to Connie's point as well, you have Mitt Romney type of Republicans who run afraid, Susan Collins as well, amongst others, who do not want to, again, enact the agenda that the American people wanted back on November 5th of 2024. Senator John Cornyn in the great Lone Star State of Texas, in fact, having that advertisement in Spanish telling Hispanic voters that he was actually against Trump when it came to border security. And here's the irony of all that. It's Hispanics along the Texas-Mexico border who want security for their communities, those ranchers and farmers who have backbreaking labor. And that's why so many of those Democrat districts turning red and why people like Mayra Flores have done so well and I predict will be reelected in 2026.
Okay, let's shift gears just slightly away from Save America. And Connie, since you've worked on Capitol Hill, I want to get your feedback on the DHS funding. President Trump set a deadline of June 1st to get DHS fully funded. The Senate is in its last week of the May session. The House, I think, comes back on Wednesday of this week. Do you think that they are going to be able to deliver by this deadline? And what happens to immigration enforcement if they miss it?
Well, I would hope that they could get it through. The Republicans say that it's technicalities that the parliamentarian rejected, from the reconciliation bill. I don't know that that's necessarily true. She was appointed in 2012 by Harry Reid, Liz McDonough. She is a employee. She's not elected to office. They don't have to follow her rulings. They could pat her on the head and say, nice, very nice suggestion, but that's not how we see the rules. And the Byrd rule that they're putting it through was something that was put in place by the Grand Wizard of West Virginia, Robert Byrd. So I'm not sure why we're listening to all of this. The parliamentarian is not an elected official. So if they are going to use reconciliation, they should be able to make it to where it is financial in nature, which is what it needs to be. It has to, spend money. Great. Give the states their, all of the money for all of their IDs, do things of that nature that make it possible for it to fit within the four corners of a reconciliation bill. It should absolutely be able to do it. And if the parliamentarian rules against it, pat her on the head and say, thank you for your advice, but we don't agree.
Everything the federal government does spends money. Don't tell me you can't use a reconciliation bill to pass policy. Okay,
exactly.
That's the stupidest argument I've ever heard, and it's a dodge. And we're so done listening to politicians make excuses for why they can't do their damn job. When every American tries to pull that stuff with their boss, they get a pink slip. Okay, and Bill Cassidy just found out what happens when you try to make excuses to the American people. And I don't know why these guys aren't smart enough to take the lesson from what happened to Bill.
They get up there, Scott. They get up there in the middle of this city and they become enlightened.
No, I get that.
Enlightened.
Yeah,
and they get this little bitty bubble where everyone agrees with them. They don't even hear anything contrary unless the little people kind of irk through every once in a while the things that they're saying. But it's kind of like our media. They don't know anybody that disagrees with them. And it's the same thing. It's the elites. They know better for us. I worked for a congressman one time and I told him he shouldn't be voting for CAFTA. And I said, have you polled your district? Have you polled them and asked them, how they feel? And he said, I know what's best for them. I resigned. That this is the mentality once they stay up there just a very short time. And it's very sad because you used to have people that served. This is not about service anymore. This is about actually making your fortune through trading stocks. As a congressman, my former boss, Louis Gohmert, did. And he took pride in the fact that he was the poorest man in Congress. Just saying.
I love Louis. I miss Louis.
Me too.
Okay, let's close today on something that I think is just as important as the legislation and the elections. In some ways, it's a foundation of everything about this country. Yesterday, Americans gathered on the National Mall for Rededicate 250. And I want to make sure that we're showing what happened there and that we're honoring what happened there. Robert, you covered President Trump's events and the conservative movement at Right Side Broadcasting. Yesterday, thousands gathered on the National Mall. President Trump, Vice President Vance, Speaker Johnson, Secretary Hegseth, and Secretary Rubio all participated. What stood out to you about yesterday's event?
Well, what really stood out, Jenny Beth, was the fact that May 17th of 1776, the exact date when Speaker Johnson reminding us in his roughly 11-minute speech yesterday that those founders, just weeks away from signing that Declaration of Independence, those 56 men who did put pen to paper from ages ranging 18 to elder at that time in life, well into their 50s, the fact that these men were willing, and women and everyone in the colonies, ready, willing, and able to lay down their life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, literally written into our founding documents, and hearkening back to that May 17th call for fasting, humility, turning back to God, and being reminded biblically that with our Judeo-Christian values, if we do just that, turning back to God, God himself saying he will heal our land. So to see some of the highest elected officials in America hearkening back to our very core foundation shows you that we do not battle amongst flesh, but rather principalities. And it truly is a fight between good and evil in present day.
Agreed.
Scott, or Connie, go ahead.
Well, if you look at the very basics, our founders intentionally took the notion of rights out of the hands of man. We founded this nation to dispel might makes right. When you have men who control what rights you're allowed to have and what rights you're not allowed to have, then the stronger takes the rights away from the weaker. But when you lift those up to the deity, to the creator of our universe, you take those out of the hands of man and you leave it with an unalienable posture where you can't even give your rights away. Now, whether your government acknowledges them or not is something completely different. But we have those inherent rights now that were articulated, not given, by our founders.
Connie, that is beautiful. I really appreciate how you just highlighted that. And you're exactly right. Our rights come from our Creator. They come from God. And the government is supposed to help protect our rights. And instead, it has gotten completely twisted. And that's how you wind up with 2,390 bills, including grocery stores paid for by the government, moving through Louisiana. Scott, how does what happened yesterday on the National Mall connect to the bigger picture?
Well, one of the things I really was struck by from watching some of the video that I saw from it, and actually a lot of the reports that I've read, was that the crowd at that event was decidedly young, which is, I think, emblematic of something that we're seeing throughout American culture, which is Gen Z is turning to God in a way that millennials certainly didn't. And, even Gen X, which my generation was, sort of the one that began falling off of organized religion. But Gen Z is packing the churches. And the interesting thing is the more old time the religion, the more interested they are. And I think a lot of that it's a backlash against all the screen time these kids had growing up, and all of the poison that's in the culture that people kind of understand the emptiness that we're being fed by corporate media and all this kind of stuff, and so there's a certain rebellion that comes from finding God, and you've seen this in societies like all over the world that have moved to socialism. Is the backlash is religion. And so, I'm not saying America has been an overtly socialist country, but the Obama years and the tail end of the Obama years that were the Biden years definitely gave people a snootful of what atheistic authoritarian government looks like. When they sent the FBI after Catholics who go to the Latin Mass, and when, they try to make the Little Sisters of the Poor get abortion coverage in their health plan, all of a sudden people notice, hey, what is this? Or when the government tells you can't post certain things on Facebook, people kind of get that tingle up their spine that, hey, something's not right. And it's not unnatural to turn to God. And I think Gen Z coming up as they have through COVID and all of these other jarring things takes less for granted than a lot of the rest of us do. And when you stop taking things for granted, there's no atheists in a foxhole. And so I think that I got a lot of hope for that generation, that they are going to eventually become the most religious and most patriotic generation that we've seen. And I think we saw maybe a little taste of that on Sunday.
I love that, and I hope that the exact same thing. It is a very good hope for our country. Thank you, Scott McKay, Connie Hare, and Robert McNeily for joining me today. I really appreciate all three of you.
Thanks for having us.
All right, one more time before we close, call your United States Congressman right now. The number is 202-224-3121. And again, that's the Capitol switchboard. Tell your congressman to attach the Save America Act to every must-pass bill until this legislation is passed into law. Also tell them no to the Dignity Act. We know it's amnesty, and we do not want amnesty. You can go to passthesaveamerica.act.com for more information about the Save America Act, and teapartypatriots.org for how to stand up against the so-called Dignity Act. And then thank President Trump by reaching out through whitehouse.gov/contact. He's fighting for the Save America Act. He's fighting for us and to protect our elections. Stand with him, thank him, and urge him to veto legislation unless and until the Save America Act gets to his desk. On May 17, 1776, the Continental Congress, men with bounties on their head, facing a war they had every reason to fear, paused everything and called the colonies to prayer. Speaker Mike Johnson stood on the National Mall yesterday and said, now, exactly 250 years to the day, tens of thousands of Americans stand together to give thanks for God's blessings over the last 250 years and to ask for his guidance for the next 250 years. One nation under God. I'm Jenny Beth Martin. This is the Jenny Beth Show, and we will close out today by playing Vice President Vance and Secretary of State Rubio's addresses to the Rededicate 250 audience. They were messages of hope and reminded us to set our eyes on God as we work for the future of our country. Make time to pray for our country today and every day as we head into Election Day.
George Washington declared in 1789 that it is the duty of all nations to acknowledge the providence of Almighty God, to obey his will, to be grateful for his benefits, and humbly to implore his protection and favor. These were the opening lines of America's first ever Thanksgiving proclamation. But whatever milestone it represented in the brief life of our young republic, the duty Washington describes to honor, obey, and give thanks to our Creator was woven into America's character long before the founding. A keen awareness of that duty has stretched all the way back from William Bradford's own Pilgrim Proclamation in 1623 to the opening prayer of our first Continental Congress, to Lincoln's call for national Thanksgiving in the midst of the Civil War, to this very gathering today. We have always been and still are a nation of prayer, and thank God for that. In times of suffering and in times of triumph, millions of Americans continue to turn to prayer and their faith in God. John Adams famously said that our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other. It was obvious to the founders that our faith was the ground upon which America stands. It was our very foundation as a people. And if this foundation were to crumble, so too would the very values that make us Americans. From our religious inheritance comes many of the virtues and institutions we most cherish as a people. Our system of justice, our generosity to neighbors, our respect for conscience, and the moral discipline necessary for liberty itself.
On this day, 2.5 centuries ago, our forefathers gathered for the second time in as many years for a national day of fasting and prayer. The resolution of the Continental Congress called on the 13 colonies to humble themselves in preparation for the coming war, with true penitence of heart and the most reverent devotion publicly to acknowledge the overruling providence of God. In 3.5 months' time, the colonists would be in open revolt against the most powerful empire in the history of the world. Many, on both sides of the Atlantic, thought their cause was a suicide mission. The founders were not naive men. They knew their lives were on the line. That was the premise of Benjamin Franklin's dark joke after signing the Declaration of Independence, where he said, "We must indeed all hang together, or most assuredly, we shall all hang separately." They had no guarantees of victory. They knew that what they were trying to do had never been done before in human history. But with the dark storm clouds of war looming on the horizon, they did what Christians have always done, across place and time for 2,000 years. They turned their eyes to heaven and placed their fate in the hands of God. It is no coincidence that America, from the very beginning, has occupied a unique and exceptional place in world history. Before the Christian West, most societies, and civilizations for that matter, thought in stagnant cycles: the flooding of the Nile, the return of the rains, the cycle of the harvest. History for them was a wheel to nowhere. It turned and turned only to end up back where it began. But our faith calls us outwards into the limitless darkness of the unknown. It tells us to go forth and preach the gospel to the world as a witness unto all nations, unto the ends of the earth. From that command came America. Our nation, more than any other in history, was shaped by this Christian idea. We saw it at work already in 1630, more than a century before the Revolution, when John Winthrop stood on the deck of the Arabella in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean and preached a sermon to his fellow Puritan colonists. "We shall be as a city upon a hill," he told them. "The eyes of all people are upon us." That same faith pushed America further to new frontiers. It was the engine of westward expansion. Who will respond to the call from beyond the Rocky Mountains, one reverend wrote in a public message to the American churches in 1833, calling for a wave of missionaries to leave the comforts of civilization and spread the gospel in the wilderness. Countless Americans answered that call. It was the same faith that was at work when Samuel Morse sent the first long-distance telegraph message in 1844. His message was a verse from the book of Numbers, "What hath God wrought?" And on Christmas Eve of 1968, 3 American astronauts orbited the moon. They were the first men in history to witness an Earthrise from lunar orbit, to look back at the blue marble of our home from 250,000 miles away. The world was watching. It was the largest television audience in the history of the world up to that point. And what did they say? They opened the book of Genesis. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. This is who we are. It is who we have always been. America is still a young nation measured against the record of history. And from the beginning, we have carried the belief that our country represents something new in the world. But the soul of our nation has always been rooted in an ancient faith